The monster inside us. Do you want a job with no prerequisite qualifications? I guess. $15 an hour, with a flexible schedule and free food? Okay. Plus it's so easy that you can even do your homework or watch TV while you're getting paid. Sign me up. Let me get this straight right off the bat. I'm not working as a babysitter because I like kids. The noise, the mess, the attention deficit whining about inane nonsense, I'd probably be happier cleaning gutters. At least there isn't any shit in the gutters. I'm taking 18 credits this semester though, and there's no arguing that it's a pretty convenient way for a girl to make a few extra bucks. Maybe I'd even make enough to move out of the house I shared with my mom. It wasn't so bad really, I just give the parents my sweetest smile, and somehow they're duped into thinking I have a maternal instinct which magically makes me adore their precious bundle of spastic chaos. The trick is forcing that smile to last all the way until the door closes. Kids may be practically retarded by adult standards, but I've found even the slowest sperm can understand negotiations when it means giving them something they want. Okay, little twerp, I'd say. I don't like you, and you don't like me. Okay, I don't really say that, but it's definitely what I'm thinking. Here's the deal. You get to eat all the sugar-blasted crap you can stomach and watch cartoons until you get a seizure for all I care. But you don't bug me, and you tell your parents we ate veggies and watched the Disney Channel. Got it? Usually that's enough, but last night was a special case where everything went wrong. I could tell it wouldn't be easy the second I walked in the door, but I had faith in my martial law parenting style and thought I could handle anything. Looks like you've got your hands full, I said, eyeing the teeth marks on the chair legs. How many pets do you have? No pets, the mother said. Just my little David. I'm only going to be gone for a couple of hours though, and I'm only a call away if you need anything. I don't anticipate any problems. I smiled, trying not to wince at the sound of pounding drums upstairs. David, get your ass down here and meet the sitter. I'm not sure where the mother was going, but I wouldn't have been surprised if she had a part-time gig as a harpy. The drums grew louder. I just kept smiling. David, I swear to God, she shrieked. It's okay, I'll handle things from here, I told her. You go have fun, and I'll give you a call if anything comes up. The drums paused after the door closed. It was time to make a deal. David was a sweet-looking boy of 11, with tousled blonde hair and bright blue eyes that would make all the girls weak in a couple of years. His gaze fixed on me with curiosity and more than enough intelligence to be reasoned with. This was going to be easy. All right, listen up, I told him. What do you want to do this evening? I want to burn something, he replied as matter-of-factly as someone ordering a hamburger. 2 somethings, if the first one goes out. You can't do that. Is there anything you'd like to watch on TV? David shook his head. I can do that anytime. But Mom's not home, so I'm going to do all the things she doesn't let me do. The first alarm started ringing in my head. It was the first of many. Being an adult was ordinarily enough to earn at least a little respect, but David completely ignored everything I said. Markers on the walls, microwaving forks, putting his shoes in the dishwasher, I couldn't turn around for a second without him doing something completely absurd. I tried locking him in his room for a bit, but when it was too quiet I opened it to find him building a slingshot with a dozen pair of underwear that would have launched his lamp out the window. He didn't even have the decency to seem embarrassed when I caught him. You're going to break it. I pulled the lamp away and put it back on his nightstand. I know. I was trying to, he said. Well, stop it. His blue eyes furrowed in deep concentration before he shook his head. No, I think I'll just wait until you're not looking. I'm going to tie you up. Is that what you want? No, you won't, he said. Or I'll tell Mom. It was an absolute standoff. I was bigger and stronger than him, but I was getting worn down fast and it was only a matter of time before I collapsed on the sofa and all hell broke loose. It was time to try drastic measures. My family had a time-honored tradition of scaring kids straight, so if he couldn't be reasoned with, I was going to have to do to him what my mother did to me. Well, if you don't stop, I'll tell on you too. I'm always good around her, David said. She won't believe you. Not your mother. If you don't do what I say, I'm going to tell the monster. And he's going to eat you up. He thought very seriously about this again. Then I'll just wait until the monster isn't looking. He's always looking though. He was smart, so I had to be pretty damn convincing and get dark with this, or he'll see right through it. My mother always used to tell me about the monster whenever I misbehaved, but she had mastered a sort of wild-eyed intensity which always sold the story. She was so convincing, that even to this day she has never admitted that it was all made up. The monster lives in your eye, so he sees everything you can see, I told him. And if you don't behave, he's going to know and start eating you from the inside out. He's going to eat up your heart, and your lungs, and your stomach, and everything else until you're completely hollow. And all the blood that has nowhere left to go, it's all going to come out of your mouth and you're going to drown in it. His face was getting paler with every word. Good, let him have nightmares about it. That's his therapist's job, not mine. What about you? He asked. Does a monster live inside you? Sure there is. There's one inside everyone. That's why the people who make it to be adults are all so serious and good all the time. That doesn't seem right, he said. There are bad adults too. The criminals and stuff. That's just because the monster has already eaten them and is using their body to do bad things. I never thought terrifying a child would be this satisfying. I wonder if Mom used to enjoy scaring me this much, or if I was just a bad person. It worked like magic though. Suddenly David decided that he was tired and wanted to go to bed. 7:30 p.m. and ready to sleep, it was a dream come true. Maybe this is the story I should use for everyone. All those hours I wasted pretending to be their friends, this was way more efficient. David went to his room and turned off the light, and I got to work studying for my final exams next week. I thought I was going to have a full evening to myself, but around 8:30 I noticed the light was back on in his room. He was being quiet, so I thought about just ignoring him, but he seemed a bit too clever to be fooled for long and I didn't want to take any chances. It's a good thing too, because when I opened the door I saw him out of bed, staring at his reflection in his mirrored closet door. His left hand was holding his left eye open as wide as it could, while the right hand held a sewing needle poised to gouge straight into it. I wanted to tackle him to the ground, but the needle was so close it was almost touching the eyeball itself. I was terrified that any sudden move would just bump it straight inside. David! What are you doing, you idiot? Put that down right now. He turned to look at me, still holding the needle directly against his eye. My whole body tensed as I imagined the feeling of that point scraping against my own eye. I can't. I need to kill the monster inside. His hand was trembling, but he pressed it a little closer into his eye. It looked like it had already started to puncture. I walked more carefully across that floor than if it were made of hot coals. No sudden moves. No harsh words. I just had to gently. David, please listen to me. There is no monster, okay? I made it all up. If you put that in your eye, you're going to hurt yourself very badly. You won't be able to see anymore. You lie, he said. He wasn't pushing it in any further though. He was listening to me. I took another step closer. I'm not lying. You can ask anyone you want, you need your eyes to see. No, you're lying about the monster, David said. I saw him. I'm going to call your mom right now, okay? I fumbled with my phone, trying to pull it out and dial without looking away from him. You can ask her, and she will tell you the same thing. There are no monsters. You're lying, and I know why, he said. The monster inside you is making you do it. It's trying to save the monster in me, but I'm not going to let it. I'm the only one who makes the rules. The number was in the phone. I was about to hit dial when his arm jerked violently. He screamed, and so did I. The needle slid straight into his eye, completely disappearing into the brilliant orb. He doubled over with pain, howling like a demon. I threw the phone onto the ground and rushed to him, too late. He was clutching his head with both hands, howling and screaming and then nothing. He just went real quiet, his head in his hands, hiding his face from me. We're going to the hospital. Now. He shook his head. David, look at me. Slowly, tortuously, he raised his face to meet me. His left eye was sealed shut, but I could still see the end of the needle poking between his closed lids. A stream of blood was freely flowing down his face like tears. It didn't work, he whispered. Then he said something else, but it was so quiet I couldn't hear. I told you it wouldn't. Now come on, we need to go now. It didn't kill the monster, he whispered again. I picked him up, and he didn't resist. He wrapped his arms around my neck to hold himself upright. I hurried him toward my car as fast as I could. Kids get things in their eyes all the time, right? This didn't mean he would be blind. They just had to take it out and... I didn't kill it, he whispered again, right in my ear where he was pressed against me. I only made the monster mad. I felt his arms grow tighter around my neck. It was hard enough carrying a boy his size, but trying to force him while he was choking me was impossible. I had to set him down and get a better grip, but he wouldn't let go. He blames you, David whispered in my ear. It's your fault we tried to hurt him. David, let go. Now you're hurting me. I know, he whispered. And that's only going to make you mad, so I'm not going to make the same mistake twice. This time I'm going to finish the job. I forced his arms off me and hurled him to the ground. His right hand was balled up like a fist, clenching the bloody sewing needle that he'd somehow managed to pull free. His left eye was still clenched shut, and his right eye was narrowed as his face twisted into an animalistic snarl. Stop playing games. We need to take you to a hospital, I said. But he wasn't playing. He was lunging at me, trying to strike at me with wild flailing punches and kicks. I managed to create some distance between us, but he was absolutely relentless. I ran down the stairs, but he leapt from the top with a wild leap and was on top of me again before I reached halfway. I felt the needle pierce into the back of my neck and I had to physically throw him off me. I was in an absolute panic by this point. I didn't take into account how small he was, or how fast he was already going when he jumped from the top of the stairs. I threw him with all my strength, which would have probably knocked an adult man onto his ass. With David, it was enough to send him straight over the railing to tumble the half-story onto the ground below. He landed with a sickening crack that made me want to just run and not look back. I rushed to where he lay spread eagle on the tile floor. A pool of blood was quickly expanding from his face. I tried to ease him onto his back to inspect the damage, but he surged awake again. He was swiping madly at my face with his little hands. I tried to pin him, but his hands were slick with blood and kept sliding through to force his needle into my arms and neck again and again. I had to grab him by the shoulders and slam him into the ground before he finally stopped. You have to lie still. I was crying at this point. He kept squirming, but I finally had both his arms firmly underneath me. There is no monster, okay? There's nothing that's going to hurt you. If you me take you to the hospital you're going to be alright. David coughed, and blood splattered halfway up my arms. I climbed off of him, but he wouldn't stop coughing. More blood, just like I'd told him would happen. Just like my mother had told me would happen. But it was absurd to think any of that was true. He'd hurt himself from the fall and I couldn't waste any more time. So why couldn't I stop crying? It was like all those years when I was growing up were flashing back to me. Every night I lay awake, listening to the sound of my own blood in my veins and the beating of my heart, wondering if I could hear the monster inside of me. All those nightmares I had as a child, everything was rushing back. I shouldn't have done this to him. I knew how much I hated it when Mom did it to me. I shouldn't have tried to scare David like that. But I was the adult now, and I had to take responsibility. So why couldn't I stop crying? Shoo. Stitch, come on now, don't cry. It was David. He had stopped coughing and was kneeling beside me. I immediately tensed, but he was stroking my hair so gently that all I could feel was relief. He was okay. My sobbing choked in my throat, and I actually started to laugh. He was the one trying to comfort me. Shoo. He whispered. Don't be like that. You have nothing to be scared of anymore. I gave him a great big hug, and felt him holding me back. We all have a monster inside us. Sometimes they never wake up, and sometimes they never go back to sleep. But you don't have to worry anymore. Our monsters, I replied. They've both gone back to sleep, haven't they? But we're still here, and we have to take care of ourselves. So will you let me take you to the hospital now? No, not asleep. Do you really think your monster could stay asleep after you killed a little boy? I tried to pull him away to look at him, but he was holding on tightly again now. More tightly than ever, tighter than a boy his age should be able to. Why don't I have to be afraid? I asked, pretending I wasn't trying so hard to get him off. Because it's so much more fun when you let the monster out, his words washed into my ear in a warm rush. I was afraid his arms would break by how hard I pushed him, but finally his hands slid apart and he fell back onto the floor. He lay there stiffly, his arms maintaining their curved shape where they were wrapped around me. The shape they had when he was still alive. The blood had stopped flowing from his mouth. His blue eyes were both closed. His shallow chest had stopped fighting to breathe. And finally, he wasn't resisting me anymore. I ran. I didn't look back. I got in my car and just started driving. I don't know what I'm going to do. David's mother knew my name and the police would find me. I couldn't even go back to my home or say goodbye to my own mom. She'd take one look at me and know what happened, and I know she'd want me gone too. She'd see the blood that I was already starting to cough up, and she'd know the monster inside of me had grown too big. She'd know all her stories and warnings hadn't been enough to get me to be good, and that now I was being eaten up too. I'm going to drive now, and I'm not going to stop until I'm not the one making the rules anymore. I just hope David was right, that it really is more fun when we let the monster out. Next story. My family tradition to feed the spirit. It's funny how the strangest traditions seem ordinary when you've grown up around them. One of my friends can't get through Thanksgiving dinner without someone spanking the turkey, and another kid in my high school said they threw a tea party to celebrate every day. I've heard about another family who never wore clothes at home. The poor kid couldn't figure out why everyone started laughing at him when he visited a friend's house and promptly began to undress. It simply hadn't occurred to him that nobody else lived quite the same way, and why should it? None of their traditions were more arbitrary than a cake on your birthday or an inside tree on Christmas. My name is Elizabeth, and my family has their own tradition. Every night after dinner, my dad would take a plate full of leftovers and bring it down to the basement. Every morning, it would be clean. My father said it was for the spirit of the house, and my mom would just roll her eyes and smile. My dad is a big man, 6'4" and over 250 pounds, and it wouldn't have surprised either of us if he just wanted to save a little extra for a midnight snack. I guess I never gave it much thought until my history class watched a video on the Black Death in Europe. They talked about how the rats would infest granaries and spread disease, and how some people actually exasperated the problem by leaving food out to appease the angry spirits. I mentioned how we always leave out a plate for our spirit, and my whole class seemed mortified by the thought. The teacher, Mr. Hallward, spent the rest of the class blatantly circumventing my desk as though I was the one carrying the plague. That night I had a terrible nightmare about rats swarming through the house and eating our leftover food. I woke in a cold sweat, lying half awake for a long time as my sleepy brain tried to separate the quiet night from my encroaching dreams. I was about to drift back to sleep when the pitter-patter of light feet clearly distinguished itself in the still air. I was fully awake now, lying very still with my ears straining against the oppressive dark. Scratch, 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 like fingernails dragging along a rough piece of wood. I pulled the blankets up over my head, more to block out the sound than to offer any real protection. Maybe this had been going on a long time, and I simply hadn't distinguished the sound from the creaking house or the night air playing through the wind chimes. Now that I was focusing on it though, I couldn't hear anything else. I thought about calling for Mom, but I was 15 years old and trying to build a case to convince them I was mature enough to have my own car. Running around crying about a nightmare was as good as giving the murder jury my bloody axe. I crept out of bed in my underwear, using the flashlight on my phone to steal through the hallway and down the stairs. The sound grew louder as I approached the basement door. If this was a rat, then it had to be the biggest rat in the history of the world. I froze at the sound of a chair being pushed across the concrete floor. Half of me wanted to turn on the light to scare it off, but the other half declared much more loudly that it was better not to risk being seen. I turned off my own flashlight and carefully opened the door. Something snarled and I immediately shut it again. I pressed my back to the door and tried to catch my breath. I hadn't realized how fast I was breathing, or how loud. I let the air out in a gasp and slowly inhaled through my nose, trying to be as quiet as I could. Scratch, 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 right on the other side of the door. I turned around and saw the doorknob beginning to turn. There's no way it was a rat in there. I can't explain how my curiosity overpowered my fear in that moment, but I put my hand on the doorknob too. I must have believed my dad when he said it was the spirit of the house. We had been taking care of it after all, so why would it want to do me harm? The door opened and I stood face to face with a pale girl a few years younger than me. Her sunken dark eyes vanished beneath her mangy bangs, and her lace nightgown failed to conceal the terrible thinness of her limbs. I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't that. I slammed the door as hard as I could and turned to run. I sprinted up the stairs, locking my room behind me and diving into bed. I held my breath until it felt like I would burst, until there, the pitter-patter of soft feet climbing the stairs and approaching my room. The doorknob began to rattle. I couldn't hold it any longer, all that breath I was holding in was released in one noisy rush and I screamed for all I was worth. The doorknob stopped and lights sprang to life around the house. In about a minute, there was a pounding on my door. "Honey? Everything okay in there?" It was Dad. I ran to him and unlocked my room. He was standing there, looking dazed and confused, ready to collapse back into bed. Now that the lights were on and he was here, I felt like an idiot for being afraid. I'd feel even stupider telling him about the girl. "Sorry," I said. "I thought I heard something downstairs." "Damn, who needs an alarm when you can scream like that?" he said. "It was probably just a bad dream. Sorry for waking you." Dad looked around behind him, making sure we were alone. Then he leaned in close and whispered, "Was it coming from the basement?" I nodded. His smile was nothing but relief, and I couldn't help but feel it too. At least until he added, "That's just the spirit, honey. Don't bother it, and don't tell Mom, okay? It's not going to hurt you." I nodded. I didn't know what else to do. He grinned and ruffled my hair before plodding back to his room. I gave the empty stairs a quick glance before locking myself in again and climbing back into bed. I don't need to tell you that I didn't sleep until the sun began to repaint my room. I slept in late that day, but by nightfall I was ready for answers. I tried asking Dad again, but he just told me every house had a spirit and not to worry about it. He must have been lying though, considering how my class reacted, and it was clear he didn't want to talk about it. That's why I waited until both my parents were in bed to creep down to the basement and wait. The basement door was open when I got there. I turned the light on in the kitchen which connected to it, but didn't dare go down the stairs. 3 pieces of leftover pizza sat in their box on the table, and I poured a large glass of soda to go with it. I just sat there with my hands folded in front of me, waiting for her to come again. If she was a friend of the house, then I wanted to meet her. And if she wasn't, well, surely we'd know by now. My mistake was to watch the door. She was corporal, she ate food, she turned doorknobs, she must go through doors, right? Wrong. Despite my resolve, it was impossible to hear the scratching sound above my head without my entire body tensing up. I watched a ventilation grate in the roof slide out of place, and then the girl dropped through as lightly as a shadow. Her hair was hanging over her face, but I could imagine it all too clearly as the animal snarl began to rise in her throat. She was as alien to me as death. I didn't even know if she could speak or understand. Her movements were erratic and unpredictable, her eyes darted like a caged animal, but we did have one thing in common which has bridged greater differences than ours: we both liked pizza, and when I offered her some, she smiled. The girl swiftly choked all 3 pieces down with savage gulps, although I was able to make out a few of her muttered words which she slipped in between. "Kevin, my dad, won't let me go. It's okay. I don't want to leave. He takes care of me. He said he loves me. He promised to marry me when I turn 13. Stay here in the kitchen, okay?" I said. I hope she didn't notice the revulsion in my voice. I couldn't believe what she was saying. I couldn't believe any of this, and I didn't know how to handle it alone. I wanted Dad to come and tell me it was all okay again, but if what she was saying was true. I came back in 5 minutes with Mom instead. It was pretty tricky shaking her so that Dad didn't wake too, but as soon as I mentioned the spirit she was out of bed in an instant. She said she never believed in that sort of thing, but the wild fear in her eyes made me think that was a lie. When we got back to the kitchen, the pale girl was still chugging through the soda which sprayed her face with foam. "Who are you? What are you doing in my house?" My mother roughly pushed me behind her. I pushed back. "It's okay, Mom. She's not going to hurt us. She needs our help." I was beginning to regret telling Mom what the girl told me. "I'm Sandy," the pale girl said. "Who are you?" "I'm Kevin's wife, that's who. The one you're making up lies about." Mom took an indignant step forward. I tried to hold her back, but she was livid. "You better tell me how you broke in, or I'm going to call the police." "I didn't break in." The pale girl stood from the table and faced us belligerently. "Kevin brought me here. He loves me." Maybe my mom was angry because she thought the girl was lying, but I think it was because she was afraid Sandy was telling the truth. I should have tried harder to stop her, but I hadn't expected her to snap like that and slap the girl across the face. Sandy's head turned sharply from the blow, but then began turning back in small, jerky increments. I think my mom was too angry to even notice the bones rearranging themselves in Sandy's neck as it turned. "You come into my house, steal food from my family, and make up these disgusting lies about my husband?" Mom was usually the sweetest thing in the world, but she had a temper that sometimes took hours to wind down. "Mom, you've got to stop. I don't care if you do got nowhere else to go, where I'm from you got to ask before you take something." "Mom, just look at her. Can't you tell she isn't normal? Now who else you been telling this perverted trash to?" Sweet Jesus, I want you out. Out of my house right this instant. What's all this noise down there? My dad thundered into the room. He froze mid-step as he instantly appraised the situation. Dear God, Kathy, my mom, have you lost your mind? My mind? Mom screamed, turning to face Dad. Don't tell me you're going to defend that creature in our house. I only hear one of you yelling, and don't you dare call Sandy a creature. I've never seen either of them so worked up. I think I was the only one who heard Sandy whispering. Is it true? It wasn't just the girl's voice that wavered. Her whole body seemed to somehow glitch and distort like a corrupted video. He married her. He lied to me. She looked absolutely heartbroken. I couldn't even begin to formulate a response. Tell me the truth, Sandy insisted. Does Kevin still love me? How was I supposed to know? I looked helplessly between Mom and Dad as they yelled at each other, and I was just stressed and overwhelmed and scared. The idea of my dad being with this child almost made me sick. All I could tell is that she shouldn't be here. I shook my head. No, he doesn't, I said. He loves my mom. You should just go. Thanks for telling me, Sandy replied. I'm going to get even now. Please don't watch. Mom didn't see it coming. The air was distorted with a pale blur, and before I could even open my mouth I saw thin white fingers tearing out my mother's throat. Most of her neck was still intact, but the trachea was pulled straight out through the skin. I don't think she suffered much on account of how quick it was, but that was a very small comfort. Dad wasn't so lucky. I thought he would have a chance to fight her off because of his size, but he didn't even put up his arms to defend. He just stood there until the white fingers punched through his chest and ripped out his heart. There was a horrible moment ere the heart was entirely out of the chest but still tethered by a network of veins and arteries, and I could see the strain on his face while she held it in her hand. I never forgot you, were the last words he ever said. Sandy distorted again, and then she was gone, fleeing back down the basement stairs and wailing like a little girl. I rushed over to my dad, but he was already gone. When the police swept the house later that night, they didn't find anyone in the basement. They listened to my statement, but I didn't see any of them writing it down, and I don't think they believed me. I was sobbing so incoherently, I wouldn't have trusted my testimony either. I just know what I experienced and later, what I saw. The police investigation did unearth a collection of photographs hidden in a shoebox in the basement. Sandy was in them, except that she glowed from happiness where she stood next to a young boy her own age. I recognized the boy as my father at once. The police didn't investigate them or entertain it as a possibility, but I did some research of my own and found out that Dad used to live next door to a girl named Sandy Withers when he was growing up. They had been best friends, more than best friends apparently, but she had died in a diabetic coma when she was 12 years old. Written in my dad's curved lettering on the back of one of the photographs was, "My future bride." I don't know what happened to make her stay in the world, but it looks like my dad never was able to let her go. It's been 3 years now, and even though everyone has pressured me to sell the house and move, I'm still living here. I guess I wasn't any good at letting go either, because I still practice the same tradition I have all my life. The only difference is that I now leave out 3 plates of food every night, and collect 3 clean dishes every morning. Next story. My face will be the last thing you see. Green eyes of a cat, and hair dark enough to make the shadows behind her look like they were glowing. I caught her staring at me over the rim of her wineglass across the room. I did what most long-time single guys in my situation would do. I pulled out my phone, and started surfing through Reddit. That's right, play it cool. Make it look like you've got important stuff going on. Just pretend you're not interested in her, then keep up the illusion until she leaves and you die alone. I really need a new strategy for meeting women. I forced myself to peek at her again. She was still looking at me, and this time she smiled. I started to smile back, but remembered just in time how uneven my teeth are and tried to twist it into a mysterious expression instead. I was trying to channel Clark Gable, but probably ended up closer to a constipated Cookie Monster. She interrupted my quiet self-loathing by beckoning me with her finger. I looked over my shoulder. There wasn't anyone behind me but the barkeeper, and his back was turned. This had to be some kind of joke. I don't think of myself as particularly ugly, a bit doughy perhaps, but I never attracted attention from women like that. Hell, I didn't even know women like that existed outside of airbrushed magazines. I'd only been planning to stop off for a quick buzz after work. I don't drink ordinarily, but the shifts have been crazy since Peter died of a heart attack last week, and I just needed to unwind. Her tantalizing invitation promised an even more enjoyable distraction though, and my feet moved on their own to treacherously thrust me into the booth beside her. I didn't fully realize what I was doing until it was too late to come up with a witty introduction. Hi. Can I help you with something? Yeah. Real smooth. What are you, a waiter? She extended a graceful hand with neatly polished nails the color of dried blood. Her skin was so pale and translucent that the blue veins were clearly visible meandering up her arm. Hello, Eddie. Can I call you Eddie? You can call me anytime, my dumb brain thought. I didn't even realize she knew my name until I'd already shaken the chill hand she offered me. Do you know me? I asked instead. Her limp fingers revived in my hand and gripped me firmly for a second as though holding on for dear life. The pressure was gone as quickly as it appeared though, and she released me before luxuriously leaning back. Not yet, but I have a way of getting to know people. Would you like me to get to know you, Eddie? I could imagine a snake whispering its prey to sleep with the same tone of voice. I felt definitively agitated sitting here, but I couldn't tell how much of it was fear and how much excitement. I don't suppose it mattered, because I was so engulfed in her presence that I was powerless to do anything but nod. The woman produced 2 decks of playing cards and placed them upon the table. Her long fingers fanned through them with the dexterity of a pianist, and I half imagined a musical score rising up from inside me as she rapidly stacked and shuffled them together. One deck seemed to contain a multitude of human faces, while the other contained a variety of surreal paintings which resembled tarot cards. You're not a witch, are you? I hadn't meant to blurt it out, but I had just seen my own face flash by on one of the cards and was becoming increasingly uncomfortable by the second. That's the wrong question to ask, she said, not even looking at the cards while she fluidly shuffled. The weapon matters not compared to the intent of the wielder. I could kill you more easily with my switchblade than a witch could with her magic, but do you really think I would hurt you? Her bluntness relieved me of my own burden for tact. I might as well be honest with her too. Yes. I think you would. She grinned and slapped the combined deck down with enough force to make the whole table rattle. I nearly fell out of my seat from the shock. Good. It's the cautious ones who last the longest. I wanted to question her further, but my attention was diverted by the cards which she began dealing. The first one she flipped from that jumbled pile depicted my face, with my name neatly handwritten below it. How did you do that? Where'd you even get that picture? Her lovely features furrowed with concentration. She didn't answer. Her hand caressed the deck with tremulous focus. She was about to draw the next card, but then gave me a wry smile and cut the deck to draw from the middle instead. Lying on the table beside my photograph was a skeleton, only its face was replaced with an exquisite painting of the woman sitting across from me. She let out a long breath like relief, but her warm smile couldn't dislodge the mounting horror in my chest. That wasn't so bad, now was it? Now we know each other a little better, don't we? I don't know anything. I don't even know your name. I was starting to get angry. It wasn't just at her for messing with me like this, I was angry at myself. How pathetic I must be to keep entertaining this nonsense just because a pretty girl smiled at me. If it had been anyone else, I would have been out the door a long time ago. "Oh, don't be like that, it's actually good news," she said. "Your photograph obviously represents you. I don't know how you got that, but I want it back." I tried snatching at it, but the card danced around her nimble fingers and evaded me. "And you recognize my face on the other, don't you? That's the last thing you'll see before you die." All the excitement was gone. My heart strained against my ribcage with nothing but the absurd fear she instilled in me. I made another wild snatch for my photograph, but she tugged it just out of my grasp again. All I could reach was the rest of the deck still on the table, so I picked that up instead. "You want these back?" I asked. "Give me my card. You aren't being very cautious right now." Her eyes narrowed with dangerous intent. I looked down at the other cards in my hand. That's when I noticed that all the other photographs had a thin red line drawn through the center. There had to be at least 20 of them in here. They weren't being cautious either, and you don't need my sight to guess what happened to them. The voice was as cold as the space between stars. I didn't even care about my photo anymore. I just wanted to get out. I didn't look back even when the bartender started shouting about my tab. All I could think about was putting as much distance as I could between myself and the woman tormenting me. What in the world was that even about? I know I don't approach women very often, but I can't imagine that's the typical reaction. As I jogged, the clean evening air unraveled the twisted knot in my stomach and began to purge the surreal experience from my mind. I slowed down to a walk, even chuckling to myself at the absurdity of what just happened. A psychic, or a con artist, not like there was a difference. That's what she had to be. She wasn't flirting or threatening, she was just trying to sell me her readings. I stopped by that bar all the time after work, so it wouldn't have been hard for her to snap a photo or get my name. Of course, she hadn't actually asked for money, but that was something I preferred not to dwell on. I replayed the scenario in my head, and even congratulated myself with how I handled the situation. Good for me, for not falling victim to her seducing charms. Although there's no denying the fantasy I still entertained of taking her in, it wasn't until I got home and was digging for my keys that I felt the deck of playing cards still in my pocket. I'd been in such a rush to get out that I hadn't even noticed taking it with me. I fanned through the deck to make sure there weren't any more photos of me, but stopped abruptly short. Peter. He was wearing the suit I saw him wear every day for the last 5 years. The thin red line scored directly across his face. She couldn't have had anything to do with. Just to be safe, I started Googling some of the other names captioned below the photographs. After the third search pulled up a third obituary, I knew there was no point in going on. 24 other cards beside my own, and all with a red line struck cleanly through the center. Every death was from a different cause. Although I noticed several quotations of shock and despair from families swearing it came without warning. I saw the woman again the next day. It was only a glimpse, but she was sitting at the bus stop I usually took. I'd left her cards at home and didn't want a confrontation about it, so I just waited the 20 minutes for the next bus to come along. There she was again at the taco shack I frequent for lunch. She was actually working behind the counter. She smiled when we locked eyes, but I immediately turned around and left without a word. The less I got involved in this lunacy, the better. Then again at the grocery store. She was deliberating between brands of peanut butter. Again at the bus stop, watching me get on. Twice more I saw her standing on different street corners on the drive home. I don't know how she was moving so quickly, but it was obvious that I was being stalked. I was being stupid for just pretending none of this happened. I had information linking a string of deaths, and I should have brought this to the police from the very beginning. I stopped off at home just long enough to grab the deck of cards off my dresser before heading down to the local station. It was getting late by now, around 8 p.m., but the dreary march of street lamps still hadn't begun to glow. I considered taking an Uber, but I didn't want to risk being trapped in a car with the woman. I just walked, trying my best not to imagine green eyes glinting in the mounting darkness around me. I should have known it wouldn't be any good. She was the officer on duty, just sitting behind her desk with hands folded patiently on the table. Not doing anything. Just waiting for me. "I've got your cards. You can have them back," I said. I dropped the stack on her desk. She didn't take her eyes off me, not even when they scattered from impact. I half turned to leave, but couldn't quite force myself to turn my back on her. "I know you did something to the others," I spluttered to fill the gaping silence. "And I don't care, okay? About Peter or any of them. I don't want anything to do with it." She didn't blink. Didn't move a muscle. I started backing up, almost making it to the door before she finally said, "I'm following you for a reason, Eddie. If you walk out that door, then you will never see me again." I hesitated. Was that a promise, or a threat? "Okay. I'm okay with that," I said. "Are you? Even knowing that my face will be the last thing you see before you die?" It sounded more like a school teacher reminding me of a formula than it did a threat. That didn't stop the hairs from rising on my skin as she stood from the desk to approach me. "How are you everywhere that I am?" I asked. "What's more likely?" She was only a foot away now. My back was against the glass door, but every word was drawing her closer. "That I'm everywhere at the same time, or that you're stuck in one place and I'm there with you. Why are you doing this to me? Why are you killing all these people?" "I don't kill anyone," she said. "I simply warn them what is to come. I give them comfort in their dying moments. Those who go violently into their final sleep are doomed to nightmares, while those I help go softly can sleep in peace. I have seen the future, and know that my face is the last thing you will ever see." The air between us was intoxicating. I couldn't break away. "The last time I see you," I managed. "It doesn't have to be today. It can be next year, or 50 years from now. I have a job to do." "How do you expect to find me again in 50 years, she asked, a bemused smile playing about her lips. "That's easy," I replied. "I'll just never let you go." Despite all her tricks, I was stronger than her. I locked my hands behind her waist and drew her into me. I wasn't ready to die, but even more than that, I wasn't ready to die alone. She seemed intrigued at first when I pressed my mouth onto hers, but then she started struggling. I held on even tighter, afraid that she would simply vanish the moment she slipped free. She couldn't love me. No one could love me for long. Even if I somehow captured her fancy, I knew someone like her could only ever get bored with someone like me. Sooner or later she would leave me, and that would be the last time I ever saw her. That would be the day I die. She was fighting now. I could feel thrashing against me like a caged animal. All I could do was hold on tighter, dragging her from the building and into the darkness outside. I crushed her against me with all my strength until my arms went numb and my fingers bled from where they clasped behind her back. Each breath she took was shallower than the last, until finally her pale skin was bleached as white as bone. She wasn't lying about carrying a switchblade, but it was a lot harder than I imagined using that to separate her head from her body. I couldn't work it through the spine, and was forced to simply peel back the skin of her face and take that with me instead. Now her face rests on the pillow to my left each night I lay down to sleep. It's the last thing I see before I close my eyes. And if death were chance to steal me before I wake, then I know I will go in peace without the burden of dreams to follow. Each morning I rise on the right and turn away from it. All through the day I walk with surety, knowing I will not die before seeing her again. One night I will look upon her and it will be my time to go, but even then, I know I won't be alone.